What would you think if I told you that the more ignorant a man is, the more convinced he becomes of his wisdom? It's not merely arrogance. No, arrogance is a symptom, not the cause. It is blindness masquerading as insight. A man stumbles in the dark, knocking over truths he cannot see, and instead of admitting his blindness, he declares himself the architect of the room. This is not stupidity. It is a psychic delusion. It is the Dunning-Kruger Effect, the cruel irony of the human ego, where the less one knows, the more one believes he knows everything. Picture the archetype of the fool, loud, confident, overflowing with certainty, preaching to the world as if crowned with divine understanding. He stands on shaky ground but pounds his chest as though the earth itself bows beneath him. This is the modern plague, not ignorance itself, but the inability to perceive it. This is not just about intelligence. It's about the psyche, the soul, the unexamined self. Psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger merely named what ancient philosophers already knew. Socrates said, "The only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing." But the fool cannot hear that. He cannot see his shadow, that hidden part of him that whispers truths his ego won't let surface. He lives in projection. He takes his incompetence and hurls it outward, blaming systems, women, society, fate, anyone but the one man responsible, himself. And here's the danger. A fool armed with confidence becomes a tyrant, not necessarily to others, but to himself. He sets fire to his own potential and then shouts at the smoke for clouding his vision. He fails upward, but learns nothing. His ego demands to be fed, not challenged. He becomes addicted to being right. To admitting ignorance would be a death, the ego's crucifixion. And so he chooses illusion. But you've seen this before. Perhaps in a lover, a father, a friend, perhaps in yourself. You've watched someone boast about wisdom they haven't earned, advice they parrot but never embody. Their words are armor, not truth. You felt it, the hollowness behind their certainty. And maybe it enraged you, or maybe it made you weep. The feminine unconscious sees this long before the mind can. She senses the false king, the boy pretending to be a man, and she withdraws, not from cruelty, but from survival. Because a man who believes he is already wise will never grow. He will never bow before truth. And a woman cannot open to a man who refuses to open to himself. The Dunning-Kruger effect is not just a statistical curiosity. It is a spiritual sickness. It is when the ego becomes so bloated that it eclipses the soul. When man becomes so addicted to being perceived as competent that he loses all capacity for learning. In ancient terms, it is hubris. And hubris always precedes the fall. But it's not irreversible. The fool is an archetype, yes, but every archetype has its transformation. The fool, when humbled, becomes the sage. The first step is death, not physical, but egoic. He must break. He must be confronted with his ignorance so deeply that it shatters his illusion of control. And that usually comes through failure. Real, brutal, soul-splitting failure. That woman who left him because he refused to listen. That career he lost because he overestimated his abilities. That friend who called him out and never came back. These are not tragedies. They are awakenings. Initiations. The universe stripping him of his armor and saying, "Now, finally, we can begin." But most men run from this. They double down. They wrap themselves tighter in the cocoon of their own delusions. They blame the world for not recognizing their greatness. They spit venom at anyone who dares hold up a mirror. They call truth cruelty and correction betrayal. And in doing so, they remain children in the skin of men. And you who have listened to the fool, who have loved him, or perhaps been him, you must decide. Will you participate in the illusion? Will you flatter the ego's throne, or will you walk away? There is power in silence. In walking away from the man who talks too much and knows too little. There is wisdom in withholding validation. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone fall. The road from fool to sage is not paved with praise. It is carved through pain, through humility, through brutal self-honesty. And only a man who welcomes that pain will ever truly grow. He begins to unravel when a mask no longer fits. The man once so certain of himself starts to feel the cracks beneath his confidence. The world doesn't bend to his delusions anymore. The applause fades. The mirror reflects back not the grandeur he imagined, but the emptiness he denied. This is the moment the fool meets the shadow. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow not as something evil, but as everything within us we have refused to acknowledge. Repressed failure, buried shame, unclaimed incompetence. The fool does not know his shadow. He is owned by it. Every boast is a scream from the unconscious. Please don't see that I don't know. Every lecture he gives is a defense against silence, because silence is where the truth waits. But the shadow is patient. It waits behind every humiliation, every failure that pierces the armor. Eventually, the man cannot run from it anymore. When his charm no longer manipulates, when his bravado no longer impresses, when she, the woman who once listened, turns cold and distant, not because she's cruel, but because she's finally awake. She sees that he does not know himself, and she will not mother his ego. This is when the man has a choice: break or awaken. Some refuse to call. They build higher walls. They immerse themselves in endless noise, distractions, conquests, accolades that mean nothing. They surround themselves with lesser men to feel superior. They demand loyalty rather than growth. They perform wisdom, but never live it. They might even become leaders, but they lead others off cliffs. Others, the rare ones, let the ego die. They stand in front of the mirror of their failures, and they do not flinch. They whisper, "I was wrong." And in that moment, something profound begins. Not a collapse, but a rebirth. Because the sage is not born from knowledge. He is born from humility, from the sacred realization that truth is vast, that wisdom is earned, and that being wrong is not a curse. It is the beginning of understanding. This transformation is violent. Internally, it feels like death. The ego screams. It claws at the mind, begging for reassurance. It wants to be special, adored, untouchable. But the soul knows better. It whispers what the Stoics understood: amor fati, love your fate. Even when your fate is to fail. Even when it humbles you so deeply that you forget who you were. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If someone is able to show me that what I think or do is not right, I will happily change, for I seek the truth." But only a man who has tamed his ego can say this. Only a man who no longer fears being seen as foolish, because he would rather be wise than right. And for women watching, there is a sacred responsibility here. Many women, empathic, nurturing, try to save the fool. They believe that if they just love him enough, he will awaken. But the fool doesn't transform through love alone. He transforms through pain, through loss, through realizing that someone will not stay just because he talks well. A woman who knows her worth becomes the crucible of awakening. She does not chase. She does not coddle. She sees his blindness and chooses herself. And in doing so, she becomes the very mirror his soul needs to finally reflect. But not every man will look. Some will curse her name. Some will say she was too much, too cold, too demanding. But deep down, beneath all the noise, he knows. He knows she saw him, the real him, and walked away, not because she didn't care, but because he refused to care for himself. This moment, the abandonment of illusion, is sacred. It is the gateway to individuation. When man stops chasing external affirmation and turns inward. When he realizes he has projected his insecurities onto the world. When he reclaims the pieces of himself he gave away in pursuit of being seen as smart, strong, or successful. And here, finally, the sage begins to emerge. Not as a perfect man, but as an honest one. He speaks less, listens more. He no longer needs to be the loudest voice in the room. He becomes a presence, not a performance. He does not chase being perceived as wise. He becomes it. The sage walks alone, not in loneliness, but in clarity. Where the fool sought attention, the sage seeks understanding. He is no longer animated by the hunger for approval, nor haunted by the fear of inadequacy. He has felt both, fully, deeply, and survived them. In that survival, He found something more sacred than applause: peace. It is a quiet thing, peace. It doesn't boast. It doesn't compete. It simply is. But don't mistake his calm for weakness. Beneath his restraint lies strength forged in fire. He has been burned by his own illusions, and now he knows the cost of ignorance dressed as confidence. He does not fear saying, "I don't know." He reveres it, because in that phrase lives the key to all learning. This is the essence of psychological maturity, the dissolution of egoic illusion and the embrace of radical self-awareness. The sage has wrestled his shadow into the light. He has gazed upon his incompetence, his arrogance, his performative intellect, and he did not turn away. He stood in the ruins of his false self and did the one thing the fool never could. He learned. Not just facts, not just strategies or theories, but deep, embodied wisdom, the kind that cannot be faked, the kind a woman feels the moment she looks into his eyes, not because he tells her he's wise, but because he no longer needs to. She senses the stillness, the absence of desperation, the way he holds silence without needing to fill it. This is power, not domination, but grounded, self-possessed being. He is no longer trying to prove anything. And that is what makes him irresistible. Because the truth is, women do not respond to mere intelligence. They respond to presence, to depth, to the rare man who does not flinch in the face of his own inadequacy, who can say, "I was wrong," and not collapse in his shame, who can admit his blind spots, his past arrogance, and still stand tall. This is the man she opens to, not because he demands it, but because she can trust him. There is no manipulation here, no fragile ego beneath the surface waiting to explode. There is only presence, real, solid, unshakable. This is what the fool never understood, that pretending to be wise is the surest sign of ignorance, that speaking over others reveals more about one's insecurity than one's intellect. The sage, on the other hand, asks questions. He listens. He contemplates. He is not swayed by every new idea or trend. He measures, he filters, and he chooses with discernment, not out of superiority, but from inner alignment. He knows now what he once couldn't bear to face. That knowledge is infinite, and human understanding is limited. That real wisdom begins where certainty ends. That growth requires discomfort, and that true power lies in humility. The humility to sit at the feet of truth and say, "Teach me." But the world still rewards the fool. This is part of the tragedy. In the age of noise, performance is often mistaken for depth. And so, many are seduced by confidence without competence. Loud men with little substance. They climb quickly, but they fall even faster. And when they fall, it is the women, the friends, the colleagues, the witnesses who are left shaking their heads. Not in mockery, but in grief. Because the potential was always there. But the fool couldn't stop performing long enough to see it. So how does one protect themselves from this illusion? By developing the eye of discernment. By looking not at the volume of someone's voice, but the content of their soul. By watching how they respond to criticism, to failure, to silence. That's where truth lives. Not in the projection, but in the reaction. And if you're the one who once wore the mask, who once mistook your echo chamber for intelligence, know this: you are not alone. Many fall into the trap, but few escape it. To do so requires courage. Not the courage to fight, but to surrender. To admit you have more to learn. To return to the role of the student, even after you've tasted the throne. But in that surrender, a new kind of man is born. One who leads not from dominance, but from understanding. Who teaches not from ego, but from empathy. Who embodies a kind of masculine presence the world is starving for. There is a sacred alchemy in failure. It strips a man bare. It peels back the layers of pretense, the carefully constructed ego, the false idols he once bowed before. It shows him who he really is, not who he pretended to be, not who he hoped others would believe, but the raw, unfiltered truth. And if he does not run, if he chooses instead to remain in that fire, he is transformed. Most will flee. The pain is too sharp, the silence too loud. They will scurry back to the world of noise, of shallow validation, of performance. They will repost their borrowed philosophies and wear self-help quotes like armor, still clinging to the illusion that appearances matter more than embodiment. But not the one who awakens. He sees now that truth is not spoken, it is lived. That wisdom cannot be faked, and the more he tries to appear wise, the more he reveals his ignorance. He begins to understand the paradox of maturity, that to grow, he must become nothing. To gain wisdom, he must first embrace the depths of his own foolishness. This is where the true battle begins, not against others, but within. He must wrestle the part of himself that needs to be seen as superior, that part who cannot stand being wrong, the inner tyrant who demands constant affirmation. This is shadow work at its deepest level, confronting the unconscious demand to be significant and learning instead to be authentic. He learns the sacred discipline of silence. When others argue loudly to prove their intelligence, he listens, not to respond, but to understand. When others mock or belittle, he remains still, not because he is weak, but because his self-worth is no longer on trial. He has nothing to prove, and therefore, he cannot be shaken. And the feminine, the true feminine, not the one reduced by cultural tropes, feels this. She is magnetized not by what he says, but by what he contains. His stillness, his groundedness, his capacity to hold discomfort, to remain present in conflict, to be honest even when it costs him comfort. He does not seek to dominate her mind. He seeks to protect her soul, and in that, she feels safe enough to bloom. But there's more. This journey is not just about attraction or competence. It is about integration, the union of light and shadow, of intellect and emotion, of masculine courage and vulnerable humility. The Dunning-Kruger Effect, at its root, is not about stupidity. It's about disconnection from self, from truth, from the ongoing nature of growth. The sage lives in the knowing that he is always a beginner. No matter how much he has achieved, there's always more to learn. No matter how far he's come, the path continues. This humility becomes his strength. It allows him to adapt, to evolve, to meet the chaos of life with calm and clarity. And for those who encounter him, the difference is undeniable. He doesn't talk about wisdom, he radiates it. Not because he memoized philosophy, but because he became it. His boundaries are firm, not reactive. His words carry weight because they are forged in reflection. He speaks when needed, and withholds when silence will serve deeper truth. He is not interested in being right. He is committed to being real. And this terrifies the fool, because the sage is everything the fool pretends to be. He represents what the fool could become, if only he would let the illusion die. That is why the fool mocks the sage, why he dismisses, attacks, projects, because somewhere deep down, he knows. He knows that wisdom cannot be stolen, it must be earned. And he fears the cost, because the cost is everything the fool clings to: approval, performance, the illusion of certainty. To step beyond the Dunning-Kruger veil is to lose the comforting lie that you are already enough, and face the liberating truth that you are always becoming. This is the paradox of transformation. It begins with loss. Loss of ego, loss of identity, loss of who you thought you were supposed to be. But from that loss rises something far more powerful than any performance. A man who is no longer led by fear, but by truth. He no longer believes he is smart. He knows he is willing to learn. And that, more than any title, is what makes him wise. Now he moves through the world with presence, not as a man who has conquered all, but as one who has finally surrendered. There is a softness to him now, not weakness, but a gentleness born from strength. The kind of strength that no longer needs to posture or defend. The kind that emerges only after the war within has ended. He no longer fears being misunderstood. He no longer flinches at the idea of being wrong. His worth is no longer tethered to perception. This is the final phase of transformation, detachment from external validation. The man who once boasted to hide his wounds now stands quietly in his truth. He understands what Epictetus meant when he said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. He has reclaimed his inner world. No longer reactive, no longer enslaved by the need to seem intelligent, desirable, or superior. He has become whole. He is not perfect, but he is integrated. The fool needed the world to reflect his greatness. The sage reflects his own inner worth back to the world. This man is rare. He does not seek attention, but when he enters a room, others feel something shift. There is gravity in his silence, depth in his gaze. When he speaks, the room listens, not because he commands it, but because he embodies something true. And the woman who knows herself, the one who has also walked through fire, sees him for what he is. She does not confuse his humility with hesitation. She recognizes the man who has done his shadow work, who has faced the discomfort of his own psyche, integrated the disowned parts of himself, and emerged with compassion rather than contempt. He will not pedestal her, nor will he diminish her. He will meet her, eye to eye, soul to soul, as equals. His validation is no longer currency she must earn. It is a reflection of his own inner abundance. He is not seeking a woman to fill his emptiness. He is offering her the overflow of his presence. And in that space, something sacred happens. She relaxes. Her defenses melt. She doesn't need to compete, perform, or protect herself. The boy who needed to be right is gone. The man who is open to learning remains. And in his presence, she remembers who she is, not what she's been told to be, not what she's had to become to survive the fools, but the woman beneath it all. He makes no promises. He makes no demands. He simply is, unmoved by the fleeting winds of perception, anchored in himself. And in that stillness, she sees not just a man. She sees a mirror reflecting her own strength, her own depth, her own worth. This is the relationship most seek but few can hold. A union not of egos, but of souls. Not a performance of roles, but a meeting of truths. Two people who have dismantled their illusions, done their inner work, and now choose, not from need, but from wholeness. And for the man who has made this journey, there is peace. He no longer fears being underestimated. He no longer hungers for the applause of the crowd. He has tasted the emptiness of egoic triumph and chosen instead the richness of inner stillness. He is not above others. He has simply stopped comparing. He has found the rarest form of confidence, the kind that does not need to be seen. He does not chase. He does not boast. He does not defend, because the man who knows his worth doesn't seek to prove it. He lives it. And the woman who sees him, she smiles, not because she's been convinced, but because she's been met. In a world of noise, he is silence. In a world of masks, he is truth. In a world of boys pretending to be men, he became one.